A.J. Muste, peacemaker, was born on January 8th, 1885, and died on this day in 1967. He was a vibrant example of Christian nonviolence in the 20th century. In 1909, he was ordained as a minister of the Dutch Reformed Church, and during the 1920s, he was a trade union activist. A.J. Muste became executive secretary of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, FOR, a religious pacifist organization in 1940, a position he held until 1953. The way of peace is a seamless garment that must cover the whole of life and must be applied in all its relationships, he wrote. During the 1960s, Muste was a key organizer in a broad anti-war movement in response to the Vietnam War. Once a reporter asked him, "Do you really think you are going to change the policies of this country by standing out there alone at night in front of the White House with a candle?" And A.J. Muste replied softly, "Oh, I don't do this to change the country. I do this so the country won't change me." For him, freedom of conscience was a determining factor in the quality of life. Perhaps his most famous quotation is, "There is no way to peace. Peace itself is the way." So I have been having difficulties with my printer as of yesterday when we did the memorial service for Diana Sklar. And let me just tell you, Diana Sklar, what a beautiful light she was. She had joined the church recently, one of the first new members to join after I started serving here. Unfortunately, she fell ill quickly afterwards and was in and out of hospitals and passed away unexpectedly and too young. But, you know, she would have been a good friend, and she was a good friend, because we're people that stands for a freedom of conscience. We stand for helping one another. We stand centered and strong. So, good morning. And good morning to everybody on Zoom. How many people on Zoom do we have today?
About 30.
What's that?
About 30.
About 30. All right. So that's quite a few people gathered here today. And so this theme, right, we started off in January with the resistance of the mind and the power of critical thinking and scientific reasoning to enable us to see more truth and more light, and to actually make things that make a material difference in the world, to change the world for a better place, not by imposing our will like a fascist does on reality, but actually looking at reality and changing our will and learning and growing. And then we talked about the power of the heart and all the things that we hold in our heart and how to have a clear heart and how that can bring a great love and justice into the world that makes the world a better place. We lifted up Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And today, we're going to be talking about the resistance of the hand and the feet and the body. We're going to talk about it in terms of freedom of conscience. Freedom of conscience. Now, I think that's kind of an overlooked word. Like, I know about freedom of conscience. I know you all know about freedom of conscience. But it is something that we really think about. Like, what does that mean? Like, conscience. What is conscience? Conscience is sort of like your moral backbone, right? Your moral center, your values. And we think a lot of times, I think in our culture, but dominated mostly by Western concepts of the division between spirit and matter and mind and reality and all those kinds of things. We think of freedom of conscience sometimes, I think, as a mental thing. But it's much more than a mental thing. It is actually where you choose to stand and what you stand for and what leads you to take action about something. I was so happy that the study for this sermon led me to the work of A.J. Muste. And in his 80s, he was out there in front of the White House with a candle every night, rain or shine, protesting the Vietnam War. For like 3 years, he was out there. And that wonderful question that reporter asked him, do you think you're going to make a difference? And how he said, yeah, well, I might not be able to change the country, but I can make sure the country doesn't change me. That's freedom of conscience. To make that stand, to stand up for what you believe in. And before that protest of the Vietnam War, there he was on the front lines talking about the depravity of McCarthyism in that Cold War era. And he was like, you know, even though he was outspoken critic of communism, there he was, people were trying to charge him with being a communist. And before that, he was a trade union activist. He was involved in the big Lawrence strikes. And before that, he was a protester of World War I and actually lost his position serving as the congregational minister in Newton Center, Massachusetts, for his outspoken views opposing World War I. And before that, he was going to divinity school. Before that, he married his college sweetheart. Before that, he was the child of Dutch immigrants who had come to the country in the late 1800s to find a better life, something more meaningful than being a stagecoach driver for the fancy people of that area. That's the life of A.J. Muste, or Muste. I should have really researched how you pronounce that. I didn't do that. Now, freedom of conscience has led me to many different things throughout my life, right? And freedom of conscience led me here when I realized I no longer fit in the UCC world theologically. There was a box too small. Maybe made that decision, right? And freedom of conscience led me to try to change the police department and work for an interfaith movement that led me to work with your Reverend Gretchen Weiss, as I was serving Second Congo down the street and working with Rabbi Elise Wechterman and the Catholic churches, and we did really good work. And before that, it led me to do work with the Innocence Project, where I was giving testimony at the Capitol. And before that, in Montana, it led me to be many light nights on the Montana television stations talking about how LGBTQ prejudice against LGBTQ bodies and lives was a human rights violation, as I was a spokesperson for Pride Montana. And the work that I did with Senator Max Baucus to bring insurance to children of all walks of life. And before that, to protest the war in Iraq as a gross lie to the people. And before that, to divinity school. Before that, to be a teacher. And before that, to marry my wife. Before that, to be a neo-beatnik poet in the streets of Boulder. Right? I mean, this freedom of conscience goes way beyond just like our political beliefs. It's about who we love and why. It's about what we're passionate about. It's about our hobbies. It's about everything that is fun about being alive. Politics is one dimension of that. And we can get distracted about all the different things that interest us. But every so often, we come to a moment of truth. What about the freedom of conscience of Alex Preddy? The ICU nurse who was just recently shot dead for, oh my gosh, taking a video of an ICE officer. What about his freedom of conscience? To be there in that protest. A protest that is really about a war against brown-skinned people. And one of the cornerstones of our country is that all people are welcome, and that we take the tired and poor from all nations, and it makes us a better country. And that we stand on the foundation of liberty and freedom, freedom of conscience, to stand up for what we believe. And that freedom of conscience created our nation in the first place. Crazy people like John Adams, our first Unitarian president, by the way. Oh, and his son, John Quincy Adams, the first person to pass a civil rights legislation as he defended the slaves on the Amistad schooner. Freedom of conscience means something to us. This morning, as we made a decision whether or not we should have church at 7 a.m., the most well-prepared person, most bright-eyed, Dave LaFerrier. There he was. He spent all day in the cold yesterday. It was cold yesterday. Thank goodness I had the excuse of having to do a memorial service. was out there in the Fish Square, and before that, trying to advocate for women's reproductive freedom. It was just a pop-up protest there at Fish Square to recognize what had happened to Alex Preddy. And there he found a miracle, a potted plant from 2 weeks ago, and the potted plant was still alive. And in that potted plant was a Murray Christmas candle, an electric one, that had stayed lit that whole time and is still lit there in the center of the square. And this morning I had hope again for the freedom of conscience. Hope to stand. Hope to love. And it was just what the doctor ordered. Because last night, before I went to bed, when I was stupidly looking at the news before I was going to bed, I saw what had happened to Alex Preddy, and I was very angry. And all kinds of fantasies started running through my head, which I will not share with you right now, because it is beneath my calling. But I'm a human being, and it happens to me too. And I had a hard time sleeping. But we remember, with people like A.J. Muste, we remember the sacred dignity. People like Alex Preddy, and everybody who's in Minneapolis right now, and all the people whose lives have been put at risk, and people that have been murdered and disappeared. And all of that now coming, and all that attention now headed to Maine. We find that something can only reside so long in our head and in our hearts before it impacts our feet. It has already impacted our feet many times. But it also makes me feel safe, because I have been a part of this tradition, and I've found a home here, and you have all found a home here, and together we will exercise this freedom of conscience in whatever way works for us, in whatever situation we are in. Thank you all. It is an honor to serve. Blessed be.